In 1235, the Great Mongol Army under Batu and Subutai commenced its fateful western campaign. Their aim? To subjugate all peoples living west of the Mongol Empire, exactly as the great Genghis Khan had envisioned. But before the Mongols could enter Europe proper, they would have to defeat the proud nations inhabiting the East European plain, the nomadic Cumans of the Great Steppe, and the divided principalities of medieval Rus. What followed was a grinding 5-year campaign of savage brutality and devastation, fought in freezing conditions of Russian winter against a dogged and defiant opponent. Welcome to our first video on the Mongol invasion of Rus. The Cuman vanguard came racing back in full retreat. Sent ahead to screen the enemy's scouts, they had instead run straight into the main Mongol army under Batu and Subutai. There was no question of resistance. Their only hope was to reach their Rus allies, who had sworn to protect them from the steppe invaders. Princes Danilo of Volhynia and Mstislav the Bold of Galicia had only just crossed the Kalka River and were still forming makeshift camps. Both Persian and Rus sources emphasize how little time they had to organize a proper line of battle. The fleeing Cumans burst through the prince's mounted retinues, shattering what little order existed. Moments later, the Mongols fell upon them. The personal chronicler of Prince Danilo spared no ink in praising the martial prowess of his patron. Danilo rode forward and charged the Tatar ranks. The Tatars gave way, and the prince struck them down with his retinue. He received a spear wound to the chest, yet because of his youth and bravery, he did not feel the wound, for he was strong, 18 years of age. But individual valor could not alter the course of the battle. The imbalance of forces was too great. Under mounting losses and the threat of encirclement, the Rus formations began to collapse. The fleeing masses were driven toward the forces of Mstislav of Chernigov, who had just completed the crossing. In the chaos at the river, Mstislav was killed alongside his sons, and his retinue was annihilated. The remaining Rus forces were under Grand Prince Mstislav the Old, who had established a fortified camp on a stony place, and either failed to join the battle in time or deliberately chose not to engage. After 3 days of siege, Batu and Subutai induced the Kievan leaders to surrender, promising that their blood would not be shed. The promise was kept to the word. The princes were trampled, laid beneath boards on which the Mongol commanders feasted. Danilo of Volhynia was luckier. He escaped the slaughter to fight the Mongols another day. He fled, and when he felt the thirst, he noticed the wound on his body, which he had not felt in battle, for he was bold and brave, and from head to toe there was no fault in him. The Battle of the Kalka River was over, a grim forewarning of the horrors that would engulf the lands of Rus. Not this time, though. The expedition of Batu and Subutai into the Pontic steppe was not intended as a full-scale conquest. Its primary objective was punitive, to strike at the Cuman tribes that had aided the enemies of Genghis Khan. At the same time, it served a second, no less important purpose: to gather as much information as they could about the next target of the Mongol expansion. In the 1200s, the lands wedged between the Baltic, the Carpathians, and the Great Steppe were collectively known as Rus. Often, the name Kievan Rus is used as well. Much like the Byzantine Empire, Kievan Rus is not an authentic name but rather a historiographical term, used to define an earlier period when Rus was a unified state. By the time of the Mongol conquests, however, that unity had long vanished. For more than a century, Rus had been fragmented into a loose constellation of principalities, around 12, though the number constantly shifted. These principalities still shared common foundations: the Rurikid ruling dynasty, the Old East Slavic language, and the Orthodox faith. Yet political fragmentation was deepening, sparking the emergence of new centers of power. 4 leading branches of the Rurikid dynasty now competed for supremacy over the fractured realm. The House of Yuri, from the Grand Principality of Volodymyr Suzdal. The House of Rostislav, from the Principality of Smolensk. The House of Oleg, from the Principality of Chernigov. And the House of Roman, from the Principality of Volhynia. Beyond these major centers stood smaller principalities, such as Turov-Pinsk, Polotsk, Ryazan, and Murom, ruled by junior Rurikid branches. Lacking the strength to compete independently, they generally folded to the will of their stronger neighbors. The leading houses, meanwhile, were consumed by the struggle for the so-called common holds, contested domains without stable ruling dynasties. The greatest prize among them was Kiev. Though politically weakened and twice sacked in the previous 50 years, possession of the city still conferred the prestigious title of Grand Prince, currently held by a ruler from Smolensk. Far to the north stood Novgorod, the greatest commercial center of the region. Governed through a form of oligarchic republic, its authority rested with the Vecha, an assembly of citizens. Still, Novgorod had a tradition of inviting a prince protector from one of the leading houses. Currently, it was Yaroslav, brother to the Grand Prince of Volodymyr. Finally, the last point of contention was Galicia, whose salt industry and political ties with Western states attracted constant rivalry. Hungarians, Poles, and multiple Rurikid houses had competed here for decades. At this moment, a Chernigov prince's son held the throne. The names of medieval Rus cities, principalities, and historical figures are often a major source of contention. In this series, we avoid modern Russian, Ukrainian, and Belarusian names, since these languages had not yet emerged in their present form during the 13th century. Instead, all names are presented as they appeared in contemporary sources, Romanized into the Latin script and simplified for documentary purposes. You can learn more about our method in the description. For Jebe and Subutai, though, such linguistic concerns meant little. After all, the hurricane from the steppe would strike all lands alike. After gathering intelligence on Rus, the Mongols turned to reconnoiter its eastern neighbor, Volga, Bulgaria. Yet his previous successes may have made Subutai overconfident. Near the Samara Bend, Mongol forces were ambushed and utterly defeated. Only around 4,000 survived. This remnant retreated down the Volga and made its way back east, carrying with it vital intelligence for the leaders of the Great Mongol Empire. With heaven's aid, I have conquered for you a huge empire. But my life was too short to achieve the conquest of the world. That task is left for you. Genghis Khan is said to have told his sons on his deathbed. While no historical record preserves this quote word for word, the idea of forging a universal empire became deeply entrenched in the imperial ideology of Genghis Khan's descendants, the Chengizids. During Genghis Khan's lifetime, each of them received his own ulus, a domain intended to sustain them both economically and militarily. Of particular importance was the ulus of Genghis Khan's eldest son, Jochi. Situated on the northwestern edge of the empire, it was meant, according to the great conqueror's design, to encompass all peoples living to the west. There was one problem. Jochi himself had little taste for conquest and outright refused Genghis Khan's order to continue the expansion. Jochi's strained relationship with his father may well have caused his downfall. In 1227, he died under unclear circumstances, with one version of events linking his death to poisoning. The task of expanding the realm passed to Jochi's son, Batu, a gifted and warlike commander who immediately appointed Subutai as his principal military advisor. Beginning in the 1220s, the two men undertook a systematic advance into the Volga region, seeking to consolidate Mongol authority over the newly claimed territories. In 1229, Batu launched his first major offensive, laying siege to the city of Saksin on the Volga. After a long and difficult campaign, the city was taken, but any further advance proved impossible. The Cuman tribes under Khan Bachman offered fierce resistance, while the peoples to the north likewise refused to submit, receiving active support from Volga, Bulgaria. In 1232, Batu attempted to launch a campaign against the Bulgars, but failed even to reach their capital, let alone capture it. The recent setbacks clearly demonstrated that without the backing of the entire Mongol Empire, the ulus of Jochi was incapable of subduing even its immediate neighbors. To reinforce Batu's armies, the Great Khan Ugadai, Genghis Khan's successor, ordered a vast mobilization across the empire. According to the established system, each family was required to provide one fighting man, equipped with several horses, usually between 2 and 4. In addition, representatives of nearly every branch of the ruling house joined the campaign. Ogadai's sons Guyuk and Kadan, Chughatai's son Baidar and grandson Beri, Tuluoy's sons Monkey and Buchek, as well as Genghis Khan's youngest son, Kulkan. Separate formations were placed under the command of talented Mongol generals who were not Chengizids themselves, such as Subutai and the young but already distinguished Baroldai. Estimates of the size of the army vary widely, ranging from 40,000 to 120,000 men, though most modern historians regard a figure of 50 to 60,000 as the most plausible. Even so, this was an unprecedented concentration of manpower, far greater than any future opponent could muster. The Mongol invasion of Europe had officially begun. The first major target of the Mongol advance was Volga, Bulgaria. Its origins stretched back 6 centuries, when in the 600s, the nomadic Bulgar tribes of the Pontic-Caspian steppe were forced to leave their homeland under Khazar pressure. While most Bulgars migrated westward, one group moved northeast and settled along the middle Volga. 3 centuries later, the Khazar Khaganate collapsed and the Volga Bulgars emerged as the dominant regional power, controlling vital trade routes linking northern Europe with the steppe and the Islamic world. These trade connections likely influenced Bulgaria's early adoption of Islam, which occurred around the same time that Rus embraced Christianity. As the northernmost bastion of the Islamic faith, the Bulgars were able to develop effective military and political institutions, successfully resisting repeated incursions from Cuman warlords and Rus princes. Perhaps it was this experience that enabled them to ambush and destroy the forces of Jebe and Subutai in 1223, as they retreated from their victorious Kalka campaign. This time, however, the balance of power was entirely different. the Bulgars now faced the combined army of the entire Mongol Empire. The invasion began in late summer of 1236, when Bulgar forces, likely kept mobilized throughout the summer, may have been partially dispersed for the harvest. Previous experience now proved of little value. Bulgar resistance collapsed with striking speed. The invaders devastated the southeastern regions, burning major urban centers before advancing on the Bulgar capital of Bilyar. Protected by 6 defensive ramparts, Bilyar was one of the most technologically advanced cities in Eastern Europe. Modern archaeology reveals traces of stone and brick buildings with underfloor heating and glass windows. The city featured a grand white stone mosque, a caravanserai, several madrasas, and public bathhouses with a population possibly reaching 100,000 inhabitants. It took the Mongols 45 days to capture Bilyar, one of the longest sieges of the entire Western campaign. The scale of destruction shocked contemporaries and was recorded in Rus chronicles. Took the glorious great city of Bulgars and massacred everybody, from monks to babies, and took many goods and set fire to the city and captivated their land. According to a local legend, 40 maidens of Bilyar built a fortress on a hill and resisted the invaders for a long time. When the stronghold ultimately fell, the Mongols slaughtered every one of the warrior maidens, yet their souls took the form of white birds, spread their wings, and flew away. Among the nations that experienced the Mongol onslaught, such legends of bravery and doomed resistance are commonplace. We will encounter many more as the Mongols push westward. As for Bilyar itself, the city was never rebuilt, and the political center of the Middle Volga gradually shifted to the northern forests. Now that Volga Bulgaria effectively ceased to exist, the Mongol army could disperse into separate detachments to complete mopping up operations. One of the most urgent tasks lay on the lower Volga, where the Cuman leader Bachman, an old adversary of Batu and Subutai, continued his guerrilla resistance. To pacify the unruly Cuman, the Mongols committed elite forces under Mongol and Subutai. According to the Persian historian Juvayni, they organized a vast sweep of the Volga estuary. Since his refuge was along the banks of the Ityl, and like a jackal, he would come out, seize something, and disappear again, Mongol Khan ordered 200 boats to be prepared, placing 100 Mongols on each. He and his brother Buchek advanced in a sweep along both banks of the river. Bachman's forces were tracked down, destroyed, and he himself was captured. When Bachman was brought before Mongol Khan, he asked to be killed by the Khan's own hand, but the Khan ordered his brother Buchek to cut him in two. Meanwhile, the northern Mongol group was tasked with subjugating the remaining Bulgar territories and neighboring tribes. By early autumn 1237, their forces crossed the Volga near the traditional ford by the Samara Bend, likely destroying nearby Bulgar settlements in the process. From there, they advanced into the lands of the Mari and the Mordvins, Finno-Ugric tribes, that were rapidly brought into submission. With no unifying power remaining after the fall of Volga Bulgaria, local rulers faced a choice: submit or be destroyed. Nearly all chose submission. In the span of a single year, the Mongols had conquered the entire region of the middle and lower Volga basin. Rus principalities were next. In November 1237, a large Mongol horde approached the small frontier town of Nuzla, having moved through the forests in secret. It was already late autumn. Snow had begun to settle over the fields, the very season when warfare usually came to a halt. Batu did not launch an immediate offensive. Instead, he sent a peaceful embassy to Ryazan, the capital of the first principality that stood in his path. Prince Yuri of Ryazan was offered peace on one condition: the payment of tribute amounting to 1/10 of all revenues. Formally, the Mongols presented their move as an attempt to avoid bloodshed, unless, of course, the Rus themselves gave cause for war. The Principality of Ryazan was dependent on the Principality of Volodymyr Suzdal and could not make foreign policy decisions entirely on its own. For that reason, envoys were dispatched to the capital of Grand Prince Yuri with an appeal for military aid. But Yuri ignored the embassy. For generations, his lands had been shielded from steppe raids by dense frontier forests, and the prince saw no reason to risk his army. As one chronicler later moralized, many then advised him to fortify the towns and to come to terms with all the princes for common resistance, but he, trusting in his own strength, despised such counsel. Oh, senseless envy! For he sought that, once the Tatars had defeated others, he might obtain even greater power. In these circumstances, the princes of Ryazan and Murom assembled in council to decide the course of action on their own. They opted to try and reach an agreement with the Mongols. Prince Fyodor, son of Yuri, was sent to negotiate with Batu, bearing rich gifts. At first, everything seemed to proceed favorably. The Khan received the envoys and promised not to devastate Ryazan. Soon, however, the situation deteriorated, and for some unknown reason, the Ryazan embassy was killed. A contemporary source, The Tale of the Destruction of Ryazan, explains what happened through a personal conflict between Fyodor and Batu. And Batu began to ask for the wives of the men of Ryazan for his bed, and a certain envious nobleman pointed out Prince Fyodor, saying that the prince had a wife of royal blood and that she was exceedingly beautiful in body. Batu, inflamed by the lust of his flesh, said to Fyodor, "Give me, prince, to behold the beauty of thy wife." But the blessed prince laughed and answered the Khan, "It is not fitting for us Christians to bring our wives to thee, wicked ruler, for fornication. If thou conquer us, then thou shalt also possess our wives." Among the Mongols, demanding women from conquered peoples was entirely customary, even honorable, if such a demand came from the Khan himself. A refusal was therefore taken as a grave insult. The murder of the envoys meant the beginning of open war. Prince Yuri gathered the troops of Ryazan and Murom and marched out to meet the enemy. The Rus warriors attacked the Mongols on the Voronezh River with desperate courage, but in the end, they were swept away by an enemy that outnumbered them many times over, and almost none escaped alive. Even so, the determination of the Rus came as a surprise to Batu. Neither in that year nor in the next, nor for many years afterward, would any principality dare such open defiance. After the defeat, the way into the heart of Ryazan lands lay open. The Mongol army surged forward, devastating everything in their path. Over the course of several days, the countryside was ravaged and the smaller towns were taken and destroyed. Their inhabitants were partly massacred and partly led away into captivity. The Mongols had work for them. Only after they had laid waste to the surrounding lands for many miles around did Batu's forces finally, on December 16th, advance against Ryazan, the capital of the principality. The center of a large and powerful principality, Ryazan was strongly fortified. The city was protected on 3 sides by ramparts and ditches, while the 4th side was shielded by the steep natural slope of the Oka riverbank. In addition to the outer earthworks, the town also possessed an inner rampart, which could serve as a second line of defense if the outer one was breached. High wooden walls completed the city's defensive system. Prince Yuri himself, having miraculously escaped his earlier defeat, had taken refuge in the city with the remnants of his retinue. There were few experienced fighting men among the defenders, yet no one even thought of surrendering the capital without a fight. Batu's forces, for their part, surrounded the city on every side and established a siege camp. The Mongols did not intend a prolonged siege, however. Ryazan was to be taken by assault, with the aid of Chinese siege weapons, and a far uglier phenomenon, the Hussar. The Chinese diplomat Zhao Hong reported, whenever they attack large cities, they first attack the smaller ones, seize the population, and put them to use. Every captive is required to gather a fixed amount of grass or firewood, earth or stones. Then the people are driven together to fill the moats of the fortresses. They spare not even tens of thousands of lives. Originally, Hussar was an Arabic term meaning charitable labor, for example in the building of a mosque. The Mongols, once acquainted with the practice, reinterpreted it in their own brutal fashion. They turned it into a system of human shields and unpaid labor and perfected it. Vast masses of the unfortunate were driven ahead of the army to their deaths in order to exhaust the defenders' arrows and to sow hesitation in their ranks. For 5 days, the Mongols attacked Ryazan's defenses without pause. Their numerical superiority allowed them to rotate assault units constantly so that the pressure on the defenders never weakened, not even at night. The small garrison of Ryazan had no such possibility. On the morning of December 21st, the 6th day of the siege, the Mongols launched a general assault, hoping to overwhelm the city with one crushing blow. They employed every siege and assault device then known across Eurasia: incendiary weapons, stone throwers, battering rams, and scaling ladders. Continuous combat, constant bombardment, and unrelenting exhaustion had by then so weakened the garrison that it was no longer capable of effective resistance. At last, the Mongols burst into Ryazan through gaps in the walls, sweeping aside the city's remaining defenders. It is difficult to imagine what became of a city into which the armies of 7 Khans had broken at once. For there remained no one to mourn or to weep, neither father nor mother for their children, nor brother for brother, nor kinsman for kinsman. All had drunk the same bitter cup to the dregs. Houses were burned, churches were looted, altars were desecrated. To this day, archaeologists uncover at the site of Old Ryazan numerous collective graves from that period, ruined structures, hidden hoards, and a thick layer of ash. The city effectively ceased to exist. After the Mongol invasion, Ryazan would be rebuilt on a different site to the north. Judging by the Persian sources, nearly the entire Mongol host took part in the siege of Ryazan, after which it turned to devastating the surrounding countryside that had not yet been touched by the invasion. Like Ryazan itself, many neighboring settlements ceased to exist. Grand Prince Yuri of Volodymyr, meanwhile, still hoped that the invasion would end now and that the Mongols, daunted by winter and the dense Russian forests, would plunder the frontier zone and then turn back to the steppe. In this, he was profoundly mistaken. The invasion had only just begun. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, help others discover it too. Hit the like button, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for the upcoming episodes. Until next time.